The war ended in Europe in the beginning of summer of 1945, and at that point I was a school teacher in the New York City system. I was an art teacher in high school, and there was an opening for somebody to devise a system of clubs to entertain our troops overseas. The Red Cross was going to run them. I applied for the job, and I got it. I was 35. I never knew that I would end in Okinawa at all. We were put on a train and told we were going off on our journey. It was at night. All the shades were drawn. Nobody must see a train moving at night. And I thought to myself, Paris, here I come. But in the morning, when we pulled up the shades, we were not in New York waiting to get on a ship to Paris. No. We were on a train and it was going west. So I knew we had been switched and we were going off to the war zone because we were still fighting in Japan at that time. We were put on a ship, and the ship was a troop transport. We were set to go to wherever they were fighting the war against Japan. Before our ship was to sail, war ended. We were told on the ship that we would be used as a guinea pig, that there were a lot of U-boats, Japanese U-boats around who might not have realized that the war ended yesterday, and that we would be sunk. They were sure we would, but they'd have to make sure we would be the first ship out, not in convoy, and with lights on at night. The ship came into Manila. That was a surprise. We didn't know where we would land. We were not told at any point during the trip. In Manila, was just a staging point. We were to go to wherever we were going to be appointed. And I was appointed to go to Okinawa. We flew to Okinawa, and I landed there at night in a terrific gale, windstorm. It was pouring in Okinawa, and everything had been blown to hell. They had no place to put us. But there was a tent they found for me that night, the Red Cross, and stuck me in there. There was one bed under a chair in the tent. It was being poured. The bed was under a constant stream. It looked like a waterfall, but it had ponchos on it, and that was where I was going to sleep, under the ponchos. It was dark and light. There was no lights of any sort. There were nurses, Army nurses had been put into this tent because their Quonset had been blown away. I spent 7 months on that dead, deserted, blasted to hell island with men who were waiting to go home, who had fought and fought terribly, inch by inch. There was nothing on this bare landscape but broken, rusting tanks, chunks of planes that had been shot down. That had been the final battle of the war. It was the definitive end of the war, because it was just a few hundred miles from the next stop, which was Japan. D-Day for the invasion of Japan was set for November 1st. And the whole army was prepared for that. The whole fleet was there. Millions of troops in the U.S. Army, in Europe, being sent home. Millions of troops going to Europe to be the occupying army. A whole army going to Japan to be an occupying army there. Thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of Japanese troops all over Asia being transported home, so that there was just a shortage of shipping everywhere. And when the troops who had been fighting from island to island were waiting and thinking, well, maybe at Christmas I'll get home. But it was not to be. Recruiter came from MacArthur's they needed Americans to work with MacArthur. There was a lot of office work and all kinds of things. And they sent a recruiter from the WWII, a WWII major, to see if she could pick some Americans off Okinawa, which would be near and already had experience with Army and so on. And so I was offered a job as a teacher. Japan was a country that was really pretty destroyed, but there were people, there were men, women, there were families, there were children, there was life, there were towns, there were cities, there were famous temples, there were loads to see, and of course I took advantage every weekend I could. I'd get off and get on a train because the trains were free. The only way you could get around was a train, or I'd get some soldier who could get hold of a jeep and we'd go on trips around. And I saw as much as I could of the country. I went to Hiroshima, it must have been about a year afterwards, sometime in late 1947. I'm not quite sure, but it was just about a year afterward. I knew an Australian soldier. That was the only way I could get down to see it, because it was off limits to Americans. But if I were invited by a member of the military, my friend, the Australian officer, might be able to get me down as a guest. And so the arrangements were made and negotiations were made, and the commanding officer of the British occupation had a sign for me, and General Eichelberger had a sign for me, and I went to Hiroshima. I got there at night. We were stationed just outside the city. I was staying with the British women who were sort of the American version of the Red Cross girls. And early the next morning, my friend and I got up. We thought we'd walk out by ourselves. That we were going to be picked up at 10 o'clock. They're going to give us a tour. My British friend was going to give us a tour. But we got up early, and we thought, we'll just go out for a walk. We walked out, and there was nothing really to see except the center tower remained, just as the eye of a storm is quiet in the middle of a tornado or of a terrible thing. This terrible Holocaust. The tower had been at the center, and so it was bent and pushed, but it was standing. But elsewhere, even the walls that had been solid rock had been melted, so that you walked along on flat with marks where rooms had been, where doors had been, where windows had been. It was like an architectural drawing laid out before me. It was so horrible. It was so awful. We didn't see anybody at all, and it was horrifying. And then two Japanese men appeared. They walked in back of us as we walked, and they spoke English. One spoke English, and he said, look at what you've done. Enjoy the scenery. You're very proud of this, I'm sure. We ran from the scene sobbing, and we went back to the house, and we begged them, take us away from here. We don't want to be here. Take us away. So they took us out. We didn't actually see any more than that. Well, the customs in Japan were completely different, and geishas were everywhere, because a geisha was not a prostitute. She was an entertainer. In that country, you couldn't make dates with girls. There were no girls around. They stayed at home. They were inferior people. They weren't free to go around or anything. So you'd go to a geisha house, and you'd have a woman who was talented, who was intelligent. You had to be very intelligent to get to be a geisha because you were to talk politics. No Japanese women knew about it, but the geishas were to know politics or to know baseball or anything that interested men. They were to play music for them, they were to dance, they were to feed them, they were to play silly games like Cat's Cradle and entertain them, and then at night they'd go home. No woman could see a geisha house. No American woman could go to it. No Japanese woman could ever go to it. But one day in Kyoto, I saw a British major walking down the street. British because there were two occupations. There was an American occupation army and there was a British occupation army. The British were in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which had been bombed. They had decided not to have American troops there. Here was this British major, and he said, "You have to go down the street. There's a wonderful, the geishas are having a graduation ceremony. It's marvelous, simply smashing. You've got to see it, but I have to get back to the office." I walked right into this graduation with my friends. I was with two other girls. We went in and we sat down and we saw the graduation.